right, good evening, everyone. I just want to be able to share with you a couple of things. It's been a while since I've been able to do a stream, a live stream, and excuse me, but I got the landscaper in the back. Still doesn't show you, Manny. So I don't know what we're probably gonna have to talk on speaker until you get everything. So good evening, everyone. My name is Hiram Figueroa. This is a segment of LinkedIn Perspective. Today I have a guest. His name is Manny Vega. And so the reason why I'm doing this as well is to show and have a conversation with Manny because of the current situation we talked about. And so moving forward, I want to be able to, I apologize for the distractions, but this is pretty much it. So what we're going to do, we're going to be able to talk about it. And Manny, see if you can look at it on LinkedIn Live on LinkedIn as well. Okay?
Okay.
Well, yeah. You okay? So you can look at LinkedIn Live. So that way we could be in there. Hold on just a minute. So, Manny, tell me a little bit about yourself since you can hear me. Okay?
Sure. And I apologize about the technical difficulties here, but again, first time using this new streaming service. But Hiram, first off, thank you very much for having me come on and to discuss what's going on. To start the story off, my son, back in 2018, went to Marine Corps boot camp, was on his 10th day at Marine Corps boot camp, and passed away down in MCRD San Diego. MCRD is Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego.
Right. So tell me more about what happened, so that way people can hear you. So don't worry about what's going on right now, but I can hear you loud and clear, so keep on going. Okay?
Gotcha. All right, no problem. And so what happened was that my son had been there, like I said, 10 days. He, he went in he had just turned 21, and he had turned 21 in February, and he was in boot camp. I mean, literally just a few weeks later. And he got there his first week. He's never been a runner. Let's get that first off. My son hated running.
Right.
And so he was an avid swimmer, and he was able to, swim competitive since he was the age of 6. He made the Junior Olympics several times. He swam in, the clubs as he was going through junior high school. And eventually when he got to high school, he was also playing water polo, swimming, was a lifeguard, surfed. So the kid was a fish, but hated running.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyways, his initial run time. And the initial run time typically, has you, the Marine Corps requires you to do 1.5 miles in, I believe, 13 minutes. I think he made it in 15 minutes. And so at that point, they moved him to what they call the Physical Conditioning Platoon.
Correct.
PCP, Physical Conditioning Platoon. And at that point, you're kind of put in a timeout. The boot camp was typically 13 weeks. When you hit the PCP platoon for, to work either on your run time, your sit-ups, your pull-ups, it kind of puts that time on a standstill.
Mm-hmm.
And so my son was there for literally like day 5. They moved him to PCP. I talked to him on the phone. I said, hey, son, don't worry about not making the run time. Now you have time dedicated to work on your run time. And so I was trying to motivate him. I spent 9 years in the Marine Corps, so I get where he was at.
Mm-hmm.
He just needed a little bit of work on the run.
Correct. Right.
What happens then? I think that was the last time I spoke to my son. It was after that, like 5 days later, that we get a phone call at the house. Excuse me, I get a phone call on my cell phone telling me, and I'm sorry because it's
Mm-hmm.
probably one of the worst phone calls I ever received. The worst phone call I ever received.
Right.
Yeah, I'm getting this phone call. It was at 3 o'clock in the morning. You know, I'm like, who's this? It's a captain from Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego.
Right.
And he tells me, hey, we found your son unresponsive in his bed.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know how long he's been without oxygen.
Right.
And we need you to get to San Diego as soon as possible.
Correct.
He's in great condition.
Mm-hmm.
To be woken up in the middle of the night and to have somebody tell you that, I cannot even begin to tell you how my world came to a complete stop.
Yeah. So so let me share this so people can because you're on this phone. So we have Manny Vega here, who's a prior military, just like myself, a Marine Corps veteran. He was in the sniper platoon. So also was law enforcement. Spent some time in the LAPD, then retired in Oxnard PD. So his son joined the Marine Corps. And then in the Marine Corps, this was back in what year, Manning? 2019 or what, 2021?
2018.
So this was back in 2018 where he joined, he signed up in the Marine Corps and went to boot camp and MCRD San Diego. And then from that point on, he had some challenges as far as not able to complete the actual qualified run that he met. It was supposed to be passing a mile and a half under 13 minutes. Correct, Manny?
Correct.
So under that, he failed. So he didn't pass it at his qualified time was 15 minutes. So you sent a physical conditioning platoon, which is a platoon for recruits that are physically challenged that cannot meet the requirements of being to be able to maintain with the rest of the platoon of the recruits. So with that being said, Manny just explained to me that he got a phone call or in the night at 3 o'clock in the morning stating that something happened to his son and he was unresponsive and they was sent to urgent care during his time at boot camp. So the problem here is what's going on is I have Manny here on the phone because he can't connect right now, but we're having a dialogue and he wants to express the concerns of how in today's society, especially in boot camp, the federal government, there are hidden agendas when we have recruits or trainees going to boot camp that's unexpectedly passed away during training. So with that being said, go ahead, tell me some more, Manny. Go ahead.
Sure. So what happened with my son was that unbeknownst to us, again, he was on his 10th day when they gave us a call. We really didn't know anything about him. So, the kids get to boot camp, and I call them kids, obviously, he's my son. You just don't hear, there's no communication whatsoever. There was supposed to be one phone call that they get when they arrive to tell you they arrived there, safely. But from my understanding, is how you dial out of Marine Corps boot camp. You got I believe you have to dial 911,
right?
Area code and the number, and then you have this written script that you're basically screaming into the phone saying that Private Vega arrived at boot camp. I'm safe. I'll be in contact. I love you. Click.
Right.
And everybody's piled up. What they called in the Marine Corps asshole to belly button, basically front to back,
Right.
And we never got that phone call. That was very concerning to me. As a former Marine, I was like, holy crap, what happened?
Correct.
I remember calling his recruiter and saying, hey, we never got a phone call. And his recruiter said, well, I'll check. And then we got a call later or something. Yeah, he's fine. But that was very, very unnerving and you know, premonition, right?
Right.
I just had a very
Bad feeling.
Yeah, and as a former Marine, as a retired police officer, my gut feelings always kept me alive. I just had a bad feeling about my son going to the Marine Corps, and I just could not get past that feeling. And so receiving that phone call in the middle of the night, my wife and I rushed down to San Diego. We get to the Naval Hospital there, which is, I believe, 2 or 3 miles away from Marine Corps Recruit Depot.
Right.
Very close. We're met in the ICU by the ICU doctor, who tells us that, again, these words, your son was found unresponsive in his bed. We don't know how long we don't know how long he's gone without oxygen, but your son is in the gravest of grave conditions. And, as a police officer, I used to be on the other side.
Right.
When we would deliver news to accident victims, murder victims, whatever it was, but I was always on the other side, this time being on the receiving side. Unbelievable. Just unbelievable. I couldn't even process it, and to this day right now, it's almost 5 years, I'm still having a hard time just, as I'm talking about it to you right now, it's so freaking vivid in my head. It's just, and so then, but what kept on ringing in my head was the phone call, and what this doctor told me, that your son was found unresponsive in his bed, and we don't know how long he's been without oxygen. And it's just so, how did they find him? He said, well, we heard strange noises, or somebody heard strange noises coming from his bed. And, again, in the Marine Corps, I saw a lot of people die.
Right.
As a police officer, I've seen a lot of people die. And unfortunately, when somebody's dying, there's different sounds that people, not so much screaming, but like a death gurgle, or at once you expired, it's kind of like whatever gas is coming out of your body. It's just a very unusual sound. And I just could not get that out of my head, thinking that, oh my God, that's what attracted what they call a fire watch. A fire watch is somebody who's on duty walking around the barracks while everybody sleeps.
Yeah. I'll share with you, so that, because I have distractions. This is what happens when you go live. You got landscapers coming in. You got a lot of unpredictability, and nothing is script. So what Manny's saying is that, you got a phone call. Now, it was pretty disappointing, because there were certain procedures in boot camp for the recruits to be able to process them and notify. Hold on just a minute. And notify the parents that their son has been able to make it to boot camp as well. So with that being said, and I apologize for the distractions as well, is that we have a father that's a concerned parent that is concerned about their son arriving to boot camp, didn't get the initial phone call, but during the course of time in those weeks of boot camp, the father receives an unexpected phone call in the middle of the night saying that his son has been able to have some medical conditions that required medical attention, and was medevaced to a hospital. So with that being said, as a former drill instructor myself, I know for a fact that 2 things have to happen. If you have a fire watch is posted recruit. You have 2 recruits, one that stays in the front of the barracks and the other one that walks around. So the other one that walks around is supposed to spot check any type of unrecognized or something that's out of the ordinary. If there's something that is a risk, or something that is of life of risk, that needs to be notified immediately to the drill instructor who's at duty at that night. Apparently, these procedures failed. So with that being said, I'm speaking to Manny that is currently with me on the phone and is unable to get on the line. But where we're bringing to attention to light is that, oh, I finally got you. Let's see what it got. See what I had you there. So go ahead, Manny. I don't have you there, but let's talk. Sorry about that.
All right.
Go ahead, man. Oh,
There you go. Can you hear me now?
yes, go ahead. Let's talk.
Okay. Sorry about that. A
Hold
little
on.
bit of a distraction.
Hold
So you're absolutely right. We never got good notification or anything that my son had arrived at boot camp. Eventually, what happens is that we are at the hospital, and I'm being told that he's gone without oxygen for quite a long time. Is gone without oxygen for such a length of time that they can't get an image of what's going on in his brain because it's just that swollen. And from my conversations with other folks, medical folks, I was told that this is he'd probably gone for about half an hour without oxygen, which is crazy. And so my son was basically dead at Marine Corps boot camp. However, they chose to move him to the hospital. And I believe that's part of, not a conspiracy theorist here, but, CYA, cover your ass.
Yeah, I gotta interject on this. So look, we're both Marines, right? We know what's going on. And you went to boot camp. I went to boot camp. I went to boot camp twice. You went to boot camp for being a sniper as well as being a POW. But a lot of people don't understand that these are hidden agendas, and I currently agree with you that there is a CYA, and I believe that at this point, people need to understand that these are real life situations that need to be addressed. And you sent me a link about that was on Vanity Fair that was a narrative about your son, and people choose not to want to listen to that as well. But before I continue on, if you like the segment of LinkedIn Perspective, subscribe to the YouTube channel, LinkedIn Perspective. I'm sorry, it's been a while. Share it, like it, tag it. If you like the comments as well, do that as well. But it's important. What we're doing today is talking about specific narratives that are important. So go ahead, Manny. I just want to make that public announcement. Keep on going.
Sure, no problem. And so with my son, we end up at the hospital. The doctor starts talking to us about possibly donating his organs. And again, as a former police officer, former investigator, I already understand that there's no hope for my son, especially when they start talking like that.
Right.
And then the doctor starts talking about how we should consider possibly taking him off life support. I can't tell you how.
Take your time, man, because the people need to look, man. Just take a moment. The reason why, and I appreciate you going in there because a lot of people don't understand that when we're veterans, right, and people really don't understand that when we leave the Marine Corps, two things happen. You have veterans that support veterans, and you have veterans that don't support veterans. And in this situation right here, it's a crisis situation. It's something that needs to be addressed for a number of facts, right? You're reaching out to me for a number of reasons. So go ahead and reach out to explain to the people, to the audience, why you reached out to me and why is it so important to hear your voice as well. Take your time.
Right. But let me get back to what I was saying about my son. The doctor was talking about, you got to make a decision here, and it's my oldest son, Patrick. My youngest daughter, Kate, at the time was 17, and she was at home in Oxnard. That's where we're from.
Right.
And I looked at the doctor and I said, hey, man, I can't make that decision. My wife and I can't make that decision without my daughter being here. Because, imagine mom and dad pulling the plug on her older brother. She would never forgive me. or forgive us. And so like we told the doctor, no, you know what, we're just going to let Patrick do what Patrick's going to do. And we'll get her down here with some family, and then she will make that decision with us.
Right.
And so my son lasted 36 hours on life support. A lot of the family came down. A lot of his friends from the water polo team, swim team came down. I had fellow police officers and even some fellow veterans that came out and were with us, you know, just in our darkest moment, you know, and I appreciate that. And then, but before all the family arrived, man, we were surrounded by about 20 or 30 different Marines at the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And we were in the waiting room, just kind of waiting for my daughter to get there. And you want to talk about awkward, fucking awkward, man. They're all sitting there. They're all just kind of staring at my wife and I as we are agonizing over the fact that we're losing our son.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just, I'm sure they were just as much shocked as we were. And I told them, I said, hey, look, you know, today you guys are going to learn a lesson. You guys are going to learn a lesson on how you go about losing your son. So pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, and I wish I would have been more clear as to what I could have been doing. But you're in such a state of shock, you're in such a fog that not even having, you know, 19 years of law enforcement, 17 years of law enforcement helps you think through this. My friends that came that were police officers, police investigators, didn't even think about starting to ask questions. We were asking questions more concerning Patrick and kind of what led up to it, but we never expanded on that. If there was ever a time to get answers, that was there, and we didn't even, you know, utilize that time properly because everybody was in a state of shock, not expecting something like this. What happens is when my son passes away, his body just gave up. When his heart stopped beating and gave up, that was on March 25th of 2018 at about 11:30 or so. I had made every deal with God possible. I had promised everything. And at that very moment, I don't think that God was listening to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll come back to that a little bit later because there's something happens from that conversation with
Mm-hmm.
God.
Right.
So we're there probably about 2 hours. We say our goodbyes to my son. The doctor comes in. He asks my wife and I, well, the next step is an autopsy. And I got to be honest with you, as a former investigator, I used to work the Violent Crime Task Force, seen a lot of murder victims, a lot of people go through autopsies. And if you never experienced an autopsy up close and personal, it is a freaking gruesome thing. And I just could not get the image out of my head, you know, of all the young men that I've seen murdered, accident victims, and just going through the whole, you know, cutting of the chest or you know, the popping of the chest cavity, the removal of the organs. Sometimes they didn't get there in there with the ladle and just count how many scoops of blood was in there and looking for bullets and stuff. And then, you know, then going in there and cutting around your scalp, pulling your face down, popping to your skull and removing the brain and going to the pituitary gland. I mean, I couldn't get that image out of my head. And I told the doctor, I go, don't fucking touch my son. I can't. Autopsy, I can't. And my wife finally had to like shake me like, hey, let them do it. It's part of the investigation. And it finally clicked. I said, yeah, you know what? Let the autopsy happen. Right.
Mm-hmm.
No sooner than we leave the hospital to start driving north to Oxnard, as we're getting on the 8 freeway down in San Diego, I get a phone call that plays over my truck speaker, right? So my wife and my daughter could hear it. I can't remember who it was, but it was somebody attached to the military that was asking me if I could donate my son's brain for traumatic brain injury.
Really?
So, yeah. So I to this day, I'm still perplexed by that whole, why would you call me and ask me to donate my son's brain for traumatic brain injury. His brain was swollen because of lack of oxygen, but I don't know if that goes hand in hand. I wish somebody could answer that for me. I don't get it. Or is there something else that was playing in the background? I don't know.
So let me interject on this, right? Traumatic brain injury, I think that two things come into hand, right? People don't fully understand the significance of what just happened with your son, right? So traumatic brain injury, two things that happen. There's got to be some form of trauma that happened to his brain. You as a law enforcement officer, and myself as a former reserve deputy, that people don't understand there's some kind of different traumas that require when we're talking about autopsies. And for you to be able to visualize what happens as a investigating officer of violent crimes, and then you're visualizing your own son going through this process is very traumatic. And then people don't understand that when you lose your son and they go before your child and they go before you, you know, we're like pretty much lost, and you never get over it. You never get over it. But my whole purpose is that we need to be able to address this, because these are real life situations as well. So go ahead, Manny. Go ahead.
Sure. So when they asked me to donate my son's brain, I was like, I'm sorry, but I can't do this. I can't, even again, think of donating my son's brain. Just imagine that. For those of you who have children, it was like beyond shocking. And I was numb, obviously driving all the way home. Not even know how I got home, but we drove home.
Right.
Just a freaking horrific experience. Just heart-wrenching.
So let's talk about this, Manny. Why is it so important, right, that we talked about? And I think the audience needs to understand how we were able to collaborate as well. So why don't you put that and explain that of
Sure.
how we, okay, go for it.
Yeah. So what happens is, here we are, we bury my son, bring him home from San Diego, bury my son. As you go through the process, the casualty affairs officer, the CACO officer, who turned out to be a very nice man, good Marine, was assisting us through this whole paperwork. And it's crazy as you go through the paperwork, because they have you sign papers, right? And in the paperwork you're signing for like a FOIA request,
Right.
A Freedom of Information Act request. And
Right.
so, why am I signing the FOIA? He goes, well, because without the Freedom of Information Act request, we can't get we can't get the Marine Command investigation report to you. I go, well, what's a Marine Command investigation report? Well, that report is going to be conducted by the command at Marine Corps Recruit Depot to see whether or not your son was in good standings. In other words, he wasn't AWOL, he wasn't, he didn't die by suicide or whatever. I guess that's SOP, standard operating procedure.
Right.
Okay, so we fill that out. At the same time, people have asked me, oh, hey, you're doing this for the money or whatever, but you know what? There is a death gratuity. There is a service group life insurance.
Yeah.
That is given to you if you're the benefactor of that.
Mm-hmm.
That's the money that we use to bury my son, and that's legacy money that's put my daughter through school. That's not our money. That is a final gift to my daughter from her big brother, and he's taking care of college for my daughter. But as we move forward in the months, we eventually get the Marine Command investigation report, and
Right.
And I have it right here. It's thick binder, and let me show it to you. Give me a second.
Yeah, go ahead. So while Manny's showing me this command, it said, if you like this segment of LinkedIn Perspective, share it, like it, tag it. I want to thank LinkedIn for giving me the opportunity to be able to do this virtual town hall. This virtual town hall is specifically geared for the subscribers on LinkedIn. This segment is pretty much I've created. It's been a year and a half. It's to be able to voice your opinion, This is a virtual town hall. This is pretty much real life segment that's unedited. It's not sponsored, but we're out here to support first responders and veterans, and in the veteran community, because these are untold stories that need to be addressed, and these are real life stories, just like Manny Vega and others, that need to be able to be voiced on, because it's important. It's a form of collaboration. We need to be able to support them, and it's the truth. So go ahead, Manny, knock yourself out.
Sure. So, I would say probably about 4 months after my son died, we ended up getting the command investigation report, the Marine Command investigation. And this is it right here. I'm going to get in front of the camera right here.
That's a big old Bible.
Yeah, and you could see that, just like back in the day when I was investigating crimes, I've gone through this word by word, sentence by sentence, and something that I don't think a parent should ever have to do. But when you start opening this, you start getting into heavily redacted, and I'm just opening it.
Yeah.
And you can see that most every page is redacted, meaning that crucial information is blocked out.
Of course, I see that. They're blocked out for a number of things. There's the non-disclosure privacy that pretty much shows that as well. And people don't understand that from a law enforcement perspective, right? When you do investigation, is that when there's documentation running the investigation, if there's certain things that are blocked up, two things happen. Certain things are so confidential they don't want you to know, and it's probably too traumatic. But you, an investigating officer, you can elaborate more on that.
Sure. No, and I agree. If there's crucial things about an investigation that, say, for example, we're dealing with a murder, yeah, you're gonna, if you're giving this to, the media or something, and you want to protect some evidence that you're still developing, absolutely. But what this is, that people again need to understand that two things happen when you go into the service, armed service. Doesn't matter which branch.
Right.
There's and I'm probably going to quote this wrong, but it's I believe it's U.S. Title 10, and I can't remember what the subsection is, but it prevents the release of any active duty name, rank, name, serial number, or their location or duty station. So
Correct.
What you're seeing in all these blanked out pages are names of people that were witnesses to what took place to my son.
Right.
And then there's other information that's blacked out. But what makes it so difficult is that the quality of the report that they provided to us, horrific copies. Here is a page of one.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so difficult to read. And that is a statement from a recruit. So me as a trained investigator, when we would go and investigate something, I would ask, like Hiram, Hiram, hey, tell me a little bit, what did you see? And in return, Hiram would respond to me. And based on his response, I would formulate my follow-up question. And we would go back and forth to where I developed the story. And then once I developed this timeline of the story, then I would kind of break it down. Okay, so just so I understand, so at this time you're there, this is what happened, this is what you saw, right? And so you develop this this narrative. But what they did with the recruits that were around my son is that they printed out a questionnaire. They gathered all the young men, they gave them the questionnaire and says, hey, you guys got 5 minutes to fill this out, hurry up. Mm-hmm. And so you honestly think that young men, young recruits are scared shitless in Marine Corps boot camp are going to give the honest truth. I could show you pages and pages of, I didn't know him, didn't interact. And then there's some other guys that did write, hey, he was sick for several days, throwing up nonstop. He was delirious his last couple hours, couldn't even stand up. We had to hold him up and walk him to the chow hall. When he ate food, he vomited. Yeah, this is something I didn't tell you. But I think we did talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
And then
I got to hold on just a minute. I gotta interject, right? Myself as a drill instructor, right, who did time on the drill field, that pushed platoons, that pushed privates to become recruits, and was also assigned to the physical conditioning platoon, and as well as the medical rehab platoon. The drill instructor's responsibility is to protect the welfare of that recruit and protect the welfare of as a drill instructor, because you're in an executive leadership role. And how do you allow a recruit to continue to vomit? And then recruits talk. They'll come up to you, drill instructor, drill instructor Sergeant Figueroa, I got this recruit right here. Recruit so-and-so is throwing up. So you know what my response is? Get him to sick bay, right? Why would I, as a drill instructor, a seasoned drill instructor, allow that to happen on my duty watch? I've had I got to share this real quick, Manny, from my perspective. I'll give you the floor. I've had privates try to commit suicide in front of me, hanging from the rafters. The driver's going to commit suicide. The private's going to commit suicide. The private wants to go home. The private's gay. No offense, but I'm just telling people the real life shit. Private doesn't want to be here. These are situations that a drill instructor has to make a conscious decision to eradicate those problems away from the recruits. So it blows my effing mind that you just told me that, and people don't understand that, to the point that I'm responsible for your son as a recruit. I'm on duty. He's my problem, right? He signed up. He's my problem. I got to make sure that he's taken care of. So I just needed to put that out there, but go ahead. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no. And I get it. And again, as a former Marine myself, 9 years in the Marine Corps, I was a platoon sergeant. I had Marines that I was in charge of, and you're absolutely right. You take pride in taking care of your own, but we're talking about training. We're not talking about war where it's a life and death decision. This is training. This is sanctioned training that should be supported by, the appropriate level of care, the appropriate level of staffing, right? But what happened was that when my son ended up in the physical conditioning platoon, he ended up with a bunch of misfits, because in physical conditioning platoon, there was also guys that were part of the medical rehab platoon that you mentioned. Medical
Correct.
Rehab platoon had guys that had lower body extremity injuries, anything from a hangnail to a bum ankle to a bum knee to a hip, whatever. And then you had other guys that had, again, broken wrist, sprained wrist, broken arm, shoulder injuries, neck injury, whatever it was. But you had these guys, and some of these recruits had, Marine Corps boot camp, 13 weeks long. Some of these young men that I later found out that were with my son had over 500 days in boot camp. Can you imagine that?
I had that. I had
days.
Yeah, I gotta share this. During my time, I've had privates in the physical condition platoon that was there for a year, and we extended them. And the medical rehab platoon, the same thing, because of medical guidances, we couldn't force them to discharge them. And if they had a great attitude and they wanted a desire, it was up to us to make the discretion on that. But at the same time, to your point, we never gave the reins to a recruit that's been there for a year and a half or something like that, because at the end of the day, he hasn't earned the title of being a United States Marine. He's still a recruit. So that's a sin on that.
No, and I agree, and I will say this also from my experience in the Marine Corps. The cream of the crop of the drill field, okay, those who are drill instructors, and you can tell me yay or nay on this, are the ones that are actively training in the training battalions. Those that end up, dealing with sick, injured, or recruits that have not met the physical requirements. From what I recall, from what I remember, from the ones I know, either they're on their, that was like their last month or whatever, and they're kind of taking a break before they leave that duty station to go somewhere else, or they were problematic drill instructors that, we got to put them somewhere and just kind of keep them in check. And so what happens with my son in my own investigation that I did, okay, for a year and a half, I had no idea that all there existed was this command investigation report that I showed you. Okay. And in the command investigation report, like I showed you, I went through it in great detail. I had other friends, law enforcement friends, also go through it in great detail. One of them surmised it in a 35-page report to me. And this individual's a medical doctor, and he broke it down and he says, hey, you know what? I hate to tell you this, but there are 5 incidents, based on the Marine Command investigation report that the outcome for your son could have been different. Right. And that's hard to hear, that there's 5 incidents that might, so 5 times in this report that Patrick could have been saved. But what happens is that there's a breakdown, there's a failure of leadership. And what I'm going with this is that the night that my son was found unresponsive in his bed was a Friday night. He had been throwing up all that day. He had collapsed in the morning. He couldn't make the run. He couldn't make the run around the track. He collapsed. They put Band-Aids on both his knees. They put him in the back of the golf cart and they took him back to the barracks. Right? He then, I don't know what happens the rest of the day, but I'm told that when he went to evening chow or evening dinner, that they had to physically help him walk across the chow line. Somebody had to hold his tray. They got him his food. They sat him down. They put the tray in front of him. Somebody was helping him eat, and he threw up all over it. And they took him back to the barracks.
They took him back to the barracks from that point on?
Yeah, this is a Friday afternoon. My son is so delirious. And this is what I gotten from my investigation. And there's a little bit of that in the written statements from these recruits, that he's drooling. He's not making cohesive sense. He's unable to stand. He needs assistance to walk around. And so what they do is they put him in a chair in front of the drill instructor's duty hut on the quarterdeck so everybody could watch him.
That does not make any sense. That doesn't make any. So let me ask you this. Under the investigation, right? Where is the drill instructor at? I mean, here I'm just playing devil's advocate, right?
Yeah. No, the drill instructor's there. He's busy dealing with everybody else, right? Supposedly. And again, you have these recruits that have been there, again, 100 days, 200 days, 300 days, 400 days, 500 days, that are kind of taking charge of the platoon, because remember, for those of you who've been in the service, that nobody wants to stick around on a Friday afternoon. If it's 3:00, man, you're beating feet. You're the hell out of town. You're going on liberty.
Right.
This is what my son was faced with. The drill instructor that had witnessed all this was coming off his shift, and a new one was coming on. So no communication. They didn't give a shit. At one point, one of the drill instructors, and I can't tell who it is because obviously the name is heavily redacted. He goes to the command duty officer. He goes to the captain. And I do know the captain's name. His name is Captain Brandon McCulley. Okay, he goes to Captain Brandon McCulley and he tells him, hey, sir, Vega is still throwing up.
So why didn't he take it?
The captain. Well, hold on. And the captain says, and it's in this report. He says, we are not going to call EMS for one recruit who is throwing up, and that freaking sealed the deal for my son. The captain said we're not going to call EMS for one recruit who's throwing up. The fucking hospital is only 2 miles away, 3 miles away. Pop an IV in my son. Jesus.
So I gotta say something, right? I know what you're saying. So why is it? This is the thing that really blows my effing mind, right? Why would a drill instructor who is responsible for the recruit sees a situation right there and doesn't administer first aid, and then he's trained to ensure the welfare of the crew, and he has to go and talk to the series commander? I would just freaking execute that plan and
pick up the phone, call 911.
Right, and why don't there in MCRD San Diego, right? You have the corpsmen out there. They got the hospital. I know for a fact it's less than a minute for the corpsmen to come down there, right? It's less than a minute. And if a worst case scenario, if it's something that's serious, why can't they take them from there to Balboa Hospital? That's like 5 miles away from there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. But what happened is, again, it's a Friday afternoon. It's a Friday afternoon, and nobody gives a rat's ass. Everybody wants to go. What happens, I do know, is that the drill instructor orders Domino's pizza. What I do know is that the drill instructor has an Xbox in his duty hut. What I do know is that the guy who was the senior recruit with over 500 days in boot camp is the one that's making up the Firewatch roster. Okay, and so let me explain Firewatch. Firewatch means that when lights go out, in this occasion, when lights go out, you have 3 recruits that are assigned to the open dormitory, squad bay, however you want to describe it.
Yeah, the squad bay. That's pretty much what it is.
For those who don't know that term, the squad bay, dormitory. It's open dormitories with double bunks lined up in military fashion. You typically have a recruit that's in the front on the quarterdeck. You have a recruit that's covering the back door, and then you have a recruit who's roving around. Okay, they call him the rover. And I'm going to show you this page right here. This is the Firewatch roster from the investigation.
Okay. They blacked out, huh? They blacked out the recruits' names and who was replacing them. I can see that.
Yeah. But if you can look at the very top, the rover will check on Vega every 10 minutes. Okay? The rover will check on Vega every 10 minutes. So let me ask you something. Who in their right freaking mind is going to write that the rover will check on Vega every 10 minutes? Now, why not every half an hour? Why not every hour? Why was it that my son had to be checked on every 10 minutes? Because what I was later told was that everybody knew how sick my son was, and everybody was anticipating an emergency that night. All the recruits and the drill instructors. My son was on the second deck, the second level of the barracks.
Right.
I spoke to several recruits that were on the first floor, and those recruits told me that we knew that your son was sick. We didn't know who he was, but we were told that if the alarm is given, that we need to wake up our drill instructor because something's happening to your son. And guess what? That proved so freaking right. So this is crazy. So the drill instructor, after he tells the captain, hey, Vegas keeps on throwing up. Captain says, just put him to bed early. We're not going to call EMS. And so what they do is that they move my son 3 beds away from everybody, isolate him because they don't know what he has. He's just throwing up, can't hold anything down, delirious. They put him to bed early, and then they go about their evening, and they all go to bed, I think, at 7. It's like an early night, at 7:15 in the evening. What happens there is that the recruit who wrote out the Firewatch, okay, this should be handled by the drill instructor, somebody of authority, somebody, like you said, who's a Marine who has that accountability, not a freaking recruit. The guy gives everybody 2-hour Firewatches. 2-hour Firewatches. Standard is 1-hour Firewatch. Every hour every hour you're shifting. That way everybody's fresh. There's new eyes on any emergency situation. And Hiram right here will tell you that you got your general orders. For those of you who served in the military, in the Marine Corps, God help you if you don't remember your general orders. And I believe the 6 general orders to receive, pass on, and obey all orders from the and forgive me for this, but I can't remember.
Senior officer, it's a command.
Command. Yeah, and so there was a written order on this Firewatch roster written by the drill instructor that the rover should check on my son every 10 minutes. Well, guess what happens? And I'm not putting the finger on this guy who's been there for 500 days, but his little lackeys that he picked from 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock, they kind of disappear.
Oh, yeah. They got comfortable.
They got very comfortable. It's during this time period that my son threw up. And forgive me for the proper terminology here, but choked on his own vomit. No, and so when they come back from screwing around, right? And here's the shitty part, that I had an opportunity to talk to these recruits that were on the last watch with my son, and they told me they used the Marine Corps phrase, and that they were smoking and joking in the corner.
Oh, yeah. And shooting the breeze.
Yeah. And so nobody was watching my son, and my son, his body was shutting down. He was mentally not there. He was mumbling. How can you not? Where the hell is the adult in the room to say, this kid's fucked up, take him to the hospital? It didn't exist. That's my point.
So, Manny, this is my point, right? And I got to interject on this so people can understand. Myself as a drill instructor, right? I see a problematic private, and 2 things happen, right? Yeah, there's 2 things that's cool. When I train recruits, and then the last part of the segment of your tour, you can pick and choose. You can be pushing recruits out there to train them, or you can take another assignment that's kind of lax. So, to your point, that's true. But the problem is this, right? In a serious matter, when you have privates, and I've had privates like that in PCP, physical conditioning platoon, and medical rehab platoon, they're very problematic for a number of reasons, because they know the system and they think they can get away with it. They know they're protected, but the drill instructors as well, they know there's no high supervisory with the commanding officer, because it's like you're babysitting these challenged recruits. And when you're babysitting these challenged recruits, 2 things happen. You got seasoned recruits that think they know everything, but they don't. They haven't graduated. And what happens is the drill instructors get way too comfortable for doing their job. They still haven't, right? They haven't completed their tour as a drill instructor. You're still responsible for that recruit. And one of the oaths as a drill instructor is, I will make sure that I take care of the privates under my care. That is part of the creed. So I'm I'm very shocked and appalled by that. And this is why a lot of people don't understand how recruit training has transitioned into a way where it's pretty liberal and pretty much woke. And I say woke in the sense is that they justify people's feelings when we lost the standards. So I just want to interject on that so people can understand from my perspective that it's my responsibility as a drill instructor, that why would I keep a private alienated from the rest of the group, knowing that he's not physically capable, he's not clinically capable. I'm not a medical expert, that I can see that there's situations that's very detrimental to the private and detrimental to the rest of the recruits, because the recruits are witnessing that. So what does that tell you about the drill instructor? And what does that tell you about the other recruits? They're going to talk about that. And when they find out something happens, it leaves a bad mark. So I just wanted to share that. Go ahead.
No, thank you. And I appreciate it. And to go, just to hit on the point, problematic. Just to clarify, my son was not problematic. My son
I'm not talking about problematic. Not your son. I'm talking about the recruits themselves.
Sure. No, and I agree. And so just to emphasize the problematic part of it, again, so almost 2.5 years later, after the passing of my son, we're talking now like 2020, sometime in that time period, my daughter's doing some research because we started a nonprofit foundation called Save Our Service Members, and you could go online and look at it, saveourservicemembers.org, and we deal with what I call from 0 to 6 months of a military career where young men and women are severely injured or killed by negligence, whether it's medical malpractice, sexual military trauma, negligent acts, failed leadership, toxic leadership, hazing, bullying. We cover all that. And I mean, you just go on our website and you take a look and it's frightening to see the amount of young men and women that we are killing.
Mm-hmm.
But when she was doing research on that, she found a story of a recruit, again, who had been there, who had just left Marine Corps boot camp after 700 days, which is, again, mind-blowing. So when I retired as a police officer, hey, I took out my PI license. Okay, what do? I start investigating who these people are. I come across, I start making contact with the family of this guy that after 700 days is released from boot camp, never became a Marine, was just released from boot camp. The kid is screwed up in the head, worse than being in prison. Because remember, prisoners have it better than recruits in boot camp. They really do.
They do. That's their world. But when you're in a controlled environment like boot camp is 700 days, right? That is ridiculous. I mean,
yeah, that is.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
That is a mind. Excuse my language. That's a mind fuck on this young man. To the point when I talked to his mom, the mom says, "I don't want you to talk to my son because he is damaged." But she said to me something that blew my mind away. Mr. Vega, we know everything about your son Patrick because there's a group of us moms that our kids were with your son when he died. I go, what do you mean? She goes, no, we kept in contact because your son's death has permanently affected our sons. And so we have this group of moms that have stayed together through your son's tragedy. That's shocking. 2.5 years later to hear that. And so again, I go back to this report. I don't know who was with my son because all the names are redacted. And like, oh my God, can you share the names with me? Because I don't even know who was with. I have not been able to talk to anybody that was with my son in his last moments for 2.5 years. I'm just assuming all this crap.
Right.
And so she gives me the names and phone numbers, and I start reaching out. And I've contacted 14 of these young men. I have 14 recorded statements from these young men that were with my son in his final hours. And the story that they told me, holy crap, it is completely different than what was presented to my wife, my daughter, and I when my son passed away.
Of course.
But let me stop there because I failed to mention one important piece, significant piece. Evidence right here. Okay. This right here is a memo from NCIS. If you look at the date is March 26, 2018. And it states in there that my son, and this is NCIS. NCIS, the Naval Criminal Investigation Services, are the ones who investigate, all the crimes, all the deaths for both the Marine Corps and the Navy.
Yeah.
And so the NCIS agent from Miramar Marine Corps Air Station, through way of a phone call, basically said that my son, and I'll just kind of read it verbatim. And I don't know who these people are, again, because it's all heavily redacted. It says blank advised that he had contacted Vega's attending physician, blank, and subsequent to Vega's death, and consulted with the duty medical examiner, and they reported that Vega had a history of sepsis, with 4 incidents resulting in admittance to the intensive care unit. Okay, blank characterized Vega's death as a result of natural causes and medically expected, resulting from an autoimmune condition. And it goes further down. The Armed Forces Medical Examiner System was not conducting an autopsy because of the cause and manner of death. And there's no further action being taken on Vega's death and no autopsies being conducted. This was less than literally 24 hours after my son died.
Are you serious?
Yeah, right here.
No, I'm just blown away by it because we know the procedure. We know the procedure. We both know the procedure, right?
Yeah.
We both know the
So NCIS somehow, with talking to the hospital, decides that my son had, for instance, a sepsis. His death was medically expected. He died of natural causes and had an autoimmune condition. My son was a freaking healthy 21-year-old boy that just didn't make the run time and got sick in boot camp.
Correct.
He might have had sepsis at the end of his life as his body shut down. He might have had an autoimmune condition as a result of his body shutting down, but he didn't have that
when he came in.
Yeah, he didn't have that, or else he wouldn't even be in. I showed this to a doctor, a friend of ours of the family, and he says, "You know what? I think they got this confused. I think they got your son confused with somebody else." And so by that, and the crazy part about this is that here we are, the day after my son dies. This is published, shuts down any investigation, shuts down an autopsy. And I don't find out about this till a year and a half later. And I'm like, what do you mean, no investigation? How can that be possible? I used to work alongside NCIS here at Naval Base Ventura County when somebody would get killed, a service member out in the city of Oxnard. And I have friends who left the police department to go work for NCIS. And I knew that they would do in-depth investigations on. So it just blew my mind. Like, how does this exist? And the more and more that I looked into this, the more and more resistance I got from NCIS, and they didn't want to look into it. And it wasn't until I called bullshit on this, all right? Because there's no way of, like, for example, when I was a police officer, both in LA and the city of Oxnard, if I pissed you off, Hiram, you could go to the station. You could say, hey, Officer Big is mistreated me, and I want to file a citizen complaint against him.
Of course.
Easily done.
Yeah.
But there is no mechanism to file a complaint against NCIS. I went high and low on their website. I even called my friends. How do I file a complaint? I don't even know who to file a complaint because all their names are redacted. So I was like, in my congressional representative, Julia Brownlee, I don't care if she's a Democrat, Republican, it doesn't matter. But you know what? This lady has stood up and fought for us. And she couldn't even figure out, she couldn't even get the answer to who the agent was from NCIS. So I went and I started looking at the complete NCIS website to try to figure out how do you file a complaint. And then I read the director of NCIS was a gentleman by the name of Omar Lopez that happened to be a special agent at Naval Base Ventura County back when it was called Port Hueneme and so on. And like, holy crap, I think I know this dude. Because when I was a cop here. So I wrote an email, just a brief paragraph, like, hey, this is what happened to my son. Your agents didn't do a good job. And I put his name, Omar.Lopez, Omar Lopez, Omar at Navy.mil, at NCIS.mil. I did these, I don't even know how many combinations of his possible email. And I hit send, and guess what? The next day he contacted me.
Wow.
He says, Mr. Vega, I'm so sorry to hear about this. I said, you guys never did a fucking report. I go, you guys shut down my son's case 24 hours after he passed away. And so what he did begrudgingly, because I was very insistent, they opened up another case. They opened up. They finally investigated my son's death. Okay, and they told us it's weird. We actually flew out to Quantico, Virginia, and we met with NCIS. And I said, look, here's my analysis of the report. Here's my 35-page synopsis of this. Here's what I found wrong with it. You know, can you guys look at this? And they looked at it very shallow, very shallow. They again, they just reviewed. They made contact with a handful of the guys because they don't go out, because they told us, she goes, well, you know, it's going to be very difficult to conduct this investigation because everybody's spread out around the world. We don't know where people are at. I go, really? You got fucking social security numbers on these guys, and you're telling me you don't know, you can't find people? And they are very hesitant. And then we were even told that if whatever field agent's going to go out there might not have the same empathy that's being shown to me here. They'll just kind of do a, you know, hey, answer these questions. And I swear to God, that's all that happened, because here is the NCIS report. And when you open it up, again, redaction after redaction after redaction, which is just another mind-blowing, you know, freaking headache. I've gone through that. I've made my list of questions. I've asked NCIS, hey, that's great that you produced this, but here's my questions based on your report. And they refuse to talk to me anymore. Again, Congresswoman Julia Brownlee has written to the director of NCIS. Guess what? They refuse to talk to her too. Isn't that freaking crazy? My son was 10 days into Marine Corps boot camp. He was not on a clandestine mission with SEAL Team 6, taking out, you know, some evil, guy that's going to end the world. And we're treated like this. But you know what's sad? That my case, our case, is not the only one. We're not the only ones. When we started looking at this, most of the people that we contacted have all experienced this. But what happens is, as we experience it, we're experiencing it individually. But when we started collecting the folks to make an organization, save our service members, holy crap. When you put all that information together of how service members and their families are treated after, non-combat related death, it's sickening. I love my country. Don't get me wrong. I love my country. I'm proud of the Marines that I served with, right? I'm proud of what I did. I'm highly decorated as a Marine Scout Sniper. Okay, but how our country treats our service members, stop and think about that. Stop and think that, and again, and I'm not getting political here, but anybody could cross over the border. Okay, right now, what's going on the border down south? You could cross over, get across the Rio Grande, set foot on American soil, and guess what? You will have more rights than an active duty service member this very minute.
Correct.
You could be convicted of pedophilia for doing a bunch of little boys, be in prison and say, hey, I want to have a sex altering surgery. Got to help the prison system that denies that. They have their rights, but our service members don't have the rights. And I'll tell you where this comes from. It comes from a 1950 U.S. Supreme Court decision. 1950. Just stop and think about 1950. Holy crap, 1950 Chevy pickup, right? That is like antiquated, right? It's like, back in just right after World War II. What happens is this law this decision is called the Ferris Doctrine. And I don't know if you ever heard of the Ferris Doctrine, Hiram?
We talked about it, but you can educate the audience. They most probably will, but you got the floor. Just tell them what they
Sure.
What the is.
So the Ferris Doctrine is named after Lieutenant Rudolph Ferris. He fought in World War II, jumped in pre-D-Day, fought through the hedgerows, the Battle of the Bulge where everybody was freezing to death, and the liberation of Europe. This guy was part of the greatest generation. He came back to the United States, and in 1947, he was in upstate New York, and there was a barracks fire in the barracks that he was staying in. It was an old, antiquated leftover from World War II. It had a boiler. He had written to his wife, I think this thing's going to blow up and kill us. And guess what? It did. And the barracks did not have exit signs, did not have a second escape route, did not have fire extinguishers. And so what happened was that his widow, the widow of Lieutenant Rudolph Ferris, along with the other widows of the other men that died, they used the 1946 Federal Torts Claim Act. The Federal Torts Claim Act allowed everyday citizens and active duty service members not in combat to sue the federal government for negligent acts. So he died in 1947. In 1946, Congress passes the Federal Torts Claim Act. The reason Congress passed that Federal Torts Claim Act was because in 1945, a B-25 Mitchell bomber flew into the Empire State Building, killing the air crew and 11 civilians. And the families of the 11 civilians started demanding compensation. And back before the Federal Torts Claim Act, you would have to go to your congressperson and say, hey, you guys killed my kid, I'm on compensation. So they would have to physically write a bill and go through the whole process of having a bill to compensate you. And they were just overwhelmed. So the Federal Claim Torts Act provided a mechanism to sue the federal government. So sovereign immunity was given up in 1946 by the United States government.
Okay.
And again, and there was a subsection in there again that's very, very important, that service members, active duty service members, can sue the federal government as long as they're not in combat. As long as they're not in combat, and everybody got that. So the widows start suing. They're winning the cases as it moves to the different district courts and appellate courts. And here's what's really interesting. Also in 1947, the War Department and the Department of the Navy come together and they form the Department of Defense, the DOD, in 1947. And this is when we get the first chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Okay. So in 1947, you have the establishment of the Department of Defense, and you also have the death of Lieutenant Rudolph Ferris at the end of it. And by 1948, the widows are going through the court system using the 1946 Federal Torts Claim Act to gain ground and to hold the military accountable. So what happens is that sometime like in 1949, it makes it all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court because the widows keep on winning these cases. So by 1950, they group three cases. They grouped the Ferris case, where Lieutenant Rudolph Ferris and four of the Army officers burned to death in upstate New York. They put them with the Griggs case and the Jefferson case. The Griggs and Jefferson cases were medical malpractice cases. In one of those cases, they pulled out Army surgeons had operated on Mr. Griggs, and they had left a 30 by 18-inch towel inside him for over a year that caused massive complications. When they opened them up again, they removed the towel. It said like Department of U.S. Army Medical. Crazy. But all these cases went grouped together in front of the U.S. Supreme Court in 1950. December 4th of 1950, there was a dissertation or an opinion given by the U.S. Supreme Court in which the U.S. Supreme Court, the justices, basically say that the 1946 Federal Torts Claim Act is wrong. They say because you're in the service of your country, and this is a key phrase, if you're incident to service, you can no longer sue the federal government. So what they do is that the U.S. Supreme Court muddies the water, blurs the lines, and so you don't have the distinction anymore of combat or non-combat. They just basically, if you're active duty service, you can't sue. So from December 4th, 1950 to right now, the U.S. the Department of Defense, the U.S. military, has acted without impunity, without any oversight, without any type of accountability. And you got to stop and you got to ask yourself, why do we have so many suicides amongst our active duty service members and our veterans? Because when I joined, and I'm sure when you joined, we didn't join with any type of suicidal ideation. But I'll tell you what, in both our careers, and I could see you nodding your head yes, and I could if I could see out there with everybody else would be nodding their head with the statement that there were idiots that were in charge of us that should have never been in leadership positions. However, because of that lack of accountability, status quo, leave them there. And so never
point. To your point, right? A lot of people don't understand the significance of that, how the transition is when you join the military. And then when you go through a lot of traumatic events during your time in the military, even if it's a short version, you're changed completely for a long period of time. And as you stated, right, the government doesn't want to address a lot of things, right? And for you and myself, we have gone through a lot of trials and tribulations. For myself, I suffered from PTSD, right? And I can honestly tell you that I can address that and I can speak to it, but I still cope with it. And that's a diagnosis that will never go away. We all have forms of PTSD or CPTSD, chronic PTSD, that manifests it in there. And the fact of the matter is that a lot of people in the audience are not aware, and especially other employment agencies, because we're so, going through a major transition and traumatic events, that they think that because we look fine outside, there's no invisible injuries that we have. And then the last thing I want to be able to share is this, that with the escalating high rise of suicides, active duty and inactive, when I'm talking about inactive, right, the ones that have left or the ones that have situations going through training, and as you stated, that one recruit that will never be the same, that is pretty much traumatic, has suicidal tendencies that people won't accept. And this is why we're addressing this as much as possible, for you to be able to express that concern, and for the others in the audience as well, because we're going to wrap this up here pretty much, but I want to be able to give this platform so you can emotionally and verbally and articulate your concerns about you as not only as a Marine, but as a law enforcement officer and as a parent, right? I can never console. There's nothing in my heart that can actually console you the loss of a child. And especially when we're going through boot camp, where we both went to boot camp, and myself as a drill instructor, I'm appalled by the lack of accountability, but it doesn't surprise me of how much of a cover-up there is. And sometimes you got to be able to stand alone and take the knots and be ostracized to prove a point. So go ahead, man. I'm sorry, but I had to share that.
No, you're fine. And so this is crazy because I was not an expert in this. I had no idea why there was no momentum in getting information as to what happened to my son. There was no after action. Nobody was losing their rank. It just didn't make sense. But when you start, you're thrown into this. This is a burden that I did not ask for. This was put on me. Okay. But as you could tell, I am into the weeds, into the details, and I'm understanding this wholeheartedly. And I told a Marine general that we had a meeting with, I said, hey, the one thing the Marine Corps taught me and did right is they taught me never to give up, never to leave our Marines. You don't leave your dead, you take care of your own. Well, guess what? This is my son as well. And my son was a Marine. And guess what? He sucked it up. He did the best he could, but fucking Marine Corps leadership failed him. And with the lack of accountability, that pendulum needs to swing upward. And what I mean by swinging upward, it needs to hit those flag grade officers, those 4-star generals, those 3-star generals, 2-star, 1-star generals. Those guys need to feel the effects, because you need to stop and understand those guys will retire with a significant pension.
Correct.
They will also put in for their VA disability, and then they will also more likely get hired by some defense contractor or even go as far as being a consultant for a foreign government, and get permission from the State Department. These guys kill more individuals. Just imagine in our world out here, all of us live with accountability. We live with You can't even put a little league baseball team on the field without having, some sort of liability insurance, some type of insurance to, if something happens, they're covered. If something wrong happens, guess what? The coach is going to go to freaking jail.
Mm-hmm.
But in the Marine Corps, in the Department of Defense, that doesn't exist. And all these guys that are in charge just kind of walk away and go to the winds. But it's not until you start holding them accountable and they're losing their pension will they start reacting to making sure that we have the proper leadership, the proper training, the proper protocols. Because that's not happening.
So look, this is a very heartfelt segment, because people don't understand that we as Marines, right, active duty, prior service, when there's a call to action and you reach out to someone like myself, I don't know you, but all I know is that we're both Marines, right? We both served, and you're reaching out to me to be able to voice my opinion of a concern. So as I promised, it's all about giving back, because as an advocate for veterans and veterans' rights in a situation like this and something this traumatic, and especially when I was a drill instructor, that I took pride, and that was like 37 years ago, and things have changed. There's just a lot of showboating that, thank God for me, during that tour of duty when I was in the Marine Corps and in the drill field, no recruit passed away on my watch. We took pride on that because we weren't going to do that. And what I've learned is that our own Marine Corps has created a cancel culture within our own. And for parents like yourself, right, prior service, that have the potential of having recruits, you have recruiters that are selling the dream to these young men and women to buy the dream. And now we have a situation of a lack of accountability. As myself working for the government, I totally understand there's going to be another talk show on this, but I want to be able to give you this platform to express your concerns and share that. We got about 3 minutes left. Manny, just close it out and tell them what you got to say and where's your website. Okay, go for it.
Absolutely. And again, my son's story is complex, as I've been showing you, report pages and all that stuff. And if you want to know a little bit more about it, Vanity Fair released an article just last week on my family's journey for justice, for accountability.
You're gonna have to put it in the comments. You're gonna have to put it in the comments when you get an opportunity to put it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so it's out there. So please take a look at it, read it. It's very informative. There's another article that follows up on that one that talks about a young man by the name of Des Del Barba and Richard Stasko. These two young men are still alive, and they've been medically wronged by military medical, and these guys are also fighting a tremendous fight. But we're not the only ones. Like I said, if you go on our website, saveourservicemembers.org, you will see the faces of hundreds of young men and women who have passed away while they're in their, at the very beginning of their military career. Again, I'm not anti-military. I love my country. I love our military, but we got to change it. We got to protect. We got to better protect the protectors, because how do we go around and enjoy freedom on the backs of young men and women who are second-class citizens? I mean, in the military, you're not even allowed to know who your medical provider is. And that is a whole nother podcast than that. that is a disaster in itself. Military medical, that is a disaster.
So let me ask you this, Manny. Let the audience know what did you learn about us meeting? What did you get out of this podcast? And the last thing, what can you, as a parent, let the subscribers on LinkedIn know how important this is? Okay.
Listen, I found you on LinkedIn. Somehow you popped up, came to my visibility. I just reached out to you in a cold, just a cold call and say, hey, this is who I am. You gave me this platform. I am very appreciative. Again, I can't say more than that. You're allowing me to tell my story so others can listen. The important thing is to understand what the Ferris doctrine is. Again, if you go to our website, you'll see a whole page on it. At the same time, just know that when your son or daughter joins the military, we all know that there is a danger that they might die in combat, but we kill more of our own in non-combat related incidents, and we need to contact our lawmakers in Washington and start complaining about this and asking for change. I am very active in Washington. They know who I am. They know who Save Our Service Members is as a group of Gold Star families. We've been leading the charge. We've been fighting the fight. But again, we need everybody's support. We need donations to help us get families to DC so their stories could be heard. It's just all of that. This is a very grassroots effort. There's Vanessa Guillen. Vanessa Guillen, her story was just released on Netflix. Look at that. There is Dalton Beals, who died at Parris Island, Marine Corps Recruit Depot, Parris Island, and that drill instructor just this week has been charged with murder.
Right.
There is just a slew of things. Just 2 months ago, we had Javier Pong, recruit Javier Pong, die at MCRD San Diego, which is crazy. Another young man. There's all these things that happen all around us, but unfortunately, individually, they don't make the news. Or they do make the local news, but they don't have a severe impact. Unfortunately, it is us grouping together that's going to raise that level of awareness to better protect our service members.
Well, Manny, stand by. I want to appreciate it. If you like this segment of LinkedIn Perspective, share it, like it, tag it. This segment is focused on Manny Vega and his son. We lost during boot camp, 10 days into boot camp. This is something as prior military people ourselves need to address, and we need to be able to support veterans after the active duty. And this is why we do this, because it's just as important. And Simplify, always beside you. Again, if you like this segment of LinkedIn Perspective, share it, like it, tag it. I want to appreciate LinkedIn for giving me the platform to be able to do this broadcast live. This is a virtual town hall. If you like this, make your comments known. If you want another part of this, we can do this as well. So stand by. Simplify, always beside you. Stand by there, Manny. And we'll take care of it. All right. Peace.